Hello there, Daniel here, otherwise known as Onion Grave 64 or Civil Onion based upon how you know me. Today we're going to talk a bit about the 6th generation and the bit in particular that relates to what I do, sort of the type matchups. Now, if you paid attention frankly to anything I've done over the past few months, you'll know that I'm quite into the Pokemon of the Week, the team building analysis, that sort of part of Pokemon in particular. So I thought this would be an ideal time to do a bit about the 6th generation. And this is an image from Bulbapedia before people ask, where did you get that picture from? Why didn't you give that picture acknowledgement? Blah 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 blah. That's where it's from. And I want to go through some key things that are going to change in the 6th generation. Let's start with the fairy type because it's the new type and people are going to be hyped about it. I still think the name for it is terrible, but that's a different debate for another day. The way this matrix works is that the typing on the left doesn't attack. Obviously then the vertical is the defendant, and the type matchup dictates whether it is super effective in green, not very effective in red, not effective whatsoever in black, or neutral in the white there. So if we look at fairy type attacking first of all, fighting types are going to be weak to fairy, as are dragon and dark types. Conversely, poison is going to resist the fairy type attacks, as will steel and fire. Not a huge surprise that steel is going to resist fairy because steel resists a lot of things. Obviously this is going to have great repercussions on the metagame, of which we can't say too much yet because we don't know too much about new moves, new abilities, new mechanics in the battles. We don't know enough about that yet to be too sure. But what I can tell you is attack wise, obviously in the OU metagame right now there are a lot of fighting types. They park their keisters there because of the popularity of Sandstorm, which means they're super effective against rock types, steel types, all that yada yada yada. Also priority moves are also very important in every tier. OU tier is no exception to that because obviously Pokemon like Breloom and Scizor get technician boosts off priority moves. However, I think what's more interesting is fairy on the defensive type. On the defensive side of things. Fairy resists fighting, so it will resist the Mach Punch, which will be very helpful. It also is going to resist Dark, so it will resist Sucker Punch, another priority move. It's also going to resist Bug for some bizarre reason. Not entirely sure why, but Pokemon logic, let's not get too much involved in that. However, it's going to be weak to Poison, which means finally Poison type stab moves will become commonplace again, I believe. We don't know yet for sure because we don't know how many fairy types are going to be integrated into the tiers. But if we take OU as an example and take Gengar, Gengar being able to use its poison stab will make it quite useful even more so than it already is. I'll explain why I picked Gengar as the example in due course. Fairy type is also going to be weak to steel. So you're going to have to be careful of your bullet punches. It's not going to be resistant to all the priority moves by any stretch of the imagination. And obviously in OU, Scizor is the big bullet punch user. Lucario can use it as well. Metagross can use it if it is so inclined. So it's going to have to be very careful. However, the big factor, if you look near the bottom right corner, Fairy takes absolutely nothing from Dragon type moves, and the reason that is so important is because you won't be able to see so many people using a Dragon Dance and then spamming Outrage over and over again, because obviously once you click it once it works 2 or 3 times by default, because people will fear getting stuck against a Pokemon they do nothing against. I mean, currently in the metagame you have to switch in a Forretress or a Skarmory or even a Ferrothorn, and that's about it. That's all your really solution is if you don't have a Pokemon with Ice Shard that can switch in, or a Pokemon that is quicker that can switch in with an Ice type move. That's kind of your only real option. So that should open up a lot more options to deal with the Dragon type, because right now it wrecks face. Almost every single Dragon type is in the OU tier or above. There's only Druddigon and Altaria which aren't. Are fully evolved Pokemon, that is. I believe there are certain of the NFEs that have managed to wangle their ways into the NU tier, for example. However, that is going to change a lot of things. like I said, no longer will you see people spamming Outrage. No longer can Dragon be considered to have almost perfect type coverage, because there's a big panel gap it is going to miss. Naturally, this means Dragon type moves are going to be coupled, if possible, with a Steel or a Poison type move, because they're the only two types that Fairy are going to be weak against. And obviously those two in type coverage in combination are actually that impressive. So it really does nerf Dragon types very much necessarily, because they dominate the higher tiers as it is right now. Obviously, if you're a big fan of RU and NU and all of that, the effect on Dragon types is going to be minimal at best. Because, well, there are barely any dragons that low down. Because most dragons are quite offensive, and with a Dragon Dance can absolutely destroy the world, or with a Swords Dance, something like that. Obviously, a Pokemon like Altaria, even with a Dragon Dance, doesn't really get that quick or that powerful. It's very useful in its own right, but not for that purpose. But it's not just Fairy types that have had a transition. Now go and look vertically down from Steel. It's kind of in the middle. I'll give it a ring. Look down. What have you noticed that's different? Go on, I'll give you a few seconds. Bing! Difference is that there are two types now that used to be resisted by Steel on the attack. Now aren't. There's Dark, which is at the bottom there. And there is also going to be Ghost. Now, the reason I brought up Gengar before is because think of how good that type coverage of Ghost Poison is going to be compared to what it was before. Obviously, Poison does jack to Steel types, so the fact that Ghost now is not resisted by Steel is a big improvement. As a result, its stab moves will be used a lot more prominently. I don't think I've seen more than probably 2% of Gengars in this 5th generation metagame use Sludge Bomb or something along those lines. Because the type coverage is so poor, it's super effective on grass and that's Shallots. Obviously that's not the case now. But the fact that Sludge Bomb is a base 90 power move and the Sludge Wave at 95 means that these moves are going to be a lot more prominent, especially in combination with either Ghost or Dark type moves. Preferably Ghost or Dark type stabs. What else does this mean? It means that things like Sucker Punch, which really in the OU tier really massively struggled to become useful because so many things resisted it, aren't quite as resisted as much. So you might see Dark types return a bit more, especially if there's Psychic types that remain in the OU tier quite prominently, because obviously Pursuit is their bane of existence. So you might see Dark types slowly float back again. You do have to bear in mind that the vast majority of Steel types are very physically bulky in particular anyway. So Sucker Punch might not do quite as much as people may first intend or think about. And you have to remember that one Steel type in OU, for example, Lucario, will still resist Dark and can run Justified, so get powered up from the Dark type move. So it's not going to absolutely obliterate the metagame in that regard. But nevertheless, I think it's just a way of getting Steel a bit more in sync with the other types. Naturally, Steel will resist a lot of things according to poker logic. But it doesn't quite resist that many things. I'm kind of surprised that Rock doesn't resist more things, given its sort of prominence as such a bold environmental feature in real life. But again, poker logic. You can't explain logic in this regard. But nevertheless, that's what we've got. What do you think about these changes? I'd like to hear from you in the comments about it. It's genuinely quite an interesting thing. What do you think it'll do to the metagame? Will it entice you to play different tiers? Which Pokemon that you think are going to become Fairy type are you going to use? Let me know. Talk to me, Al. I want to hear from you all. Peace out.